Hello and welcome to the 2022 Tata Steel tournament. The Wimbledon of chess, as it's been called. I hear people really do say that. Tata Steel is always held in the small Dutch village of Zee, which is here, and it looks like this. The players this year are these 14 dashing gentlemen right here. The world champion Magnus Carlsen has won this tournament 7 times. It's more than anyone else. Also present is last year's winner, enjoying his home field advantage, Dutch GM Jordan van Voorst. The format is round robin. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, it means everyone plays everyone, and then it's over and everyone goes home. The prize pool is undisclosed. They're so secretive and mysterious, the Dutch. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to cover all the games of Magnus Carlsen in this tournament. I think we should try to learn from the best. So for round 1, Magnus plays Russian GM Andrei Esipenko, the young gun, only 19 winners old. Both players are coming off of a good run and entering this tournament. Esipenko beat Magnus last year at the same event, then only 18 winners old. That was Magnus' first loss to a teenager since 2011. Magnus, I'm sure, will be looking to show Esipenko what's what and who's who today. So let's get to it. So we'll be taking a look at the games from Magnus' perspective. He's playing black here. So Esipenko starts with d4. So Magnus plays d5, we have c4, Queen's Gambit. Esipenko clearly inspired by the Netflix series. We have e6, knight f3, knight f6, all the very standard stuff. So knight c3, and here Magnus is looking to push the c-pawn. So let me ask you, if given the choice here between c6 and c5, what do you think, what would you play here? And pause and think about it if you want. So typically, black wants to play c5 sooner or later in this position in order to equalize in terms of central control by exchanging c-pawn for d-pawn. And the question is c5 immediately here premature? So in this position, c5 is certainly playable, but after looking at it, I prefer c6, and so does Magnus. It is what he played. But let's see what happens if he plays c5. And so the problem, I think, is a lot of central tension like this tends to favor the side with more development. Here, black creates some problems for himself. So c takes, and now you have a choice. You can take with a pawn or with a knight, right? So let's look at pawn takes. And once the c and d pawn get exchanged, black is saddled with the isolated queen pawn and not really with any clear compensation. The bishop is coming to g5, pressuring the defender of the central pawn, and it's a bit tough to hold the isolated pawn long term. Going back, the other try here is knight takes. And so e4 comes, and now there's nothing better than capturing the knight. And it's a bit uncomfortable for black, as white has this huge central presence, even after the c-pawns get exchanged. But Magnus didn't play this, so let's go back to the game. So here we are, and Magnus plays c6. Now, this position is called the semi-Slav defense, signified by the central pawn trio. So Esipenko goes e3. And the bishop now protects the c-pawn, which is necessary because now that Magnus has played c6, he would have otherwise been able to capture on c4 and hold on to the pawn playing b5. We have knight d7, continuing development. Queen to c2, sort of a waiting move, wanting to take back on c4 in one move instead of two, hoping for black to capture on c4. We have b6, prepares to activate the light squared bishop along the long diagonal. b3, white follows suit. And note that Magnus is delaying development of his kingside bishop, perhaps to maintain flexibility, as the bishop might be best placed on e7 or d6, depending on what Esipenko plays. Bishop comes out, both sides castle. And so white enjoys a small advantage here in the form of more space. As space provides him with a third rank square for both his knights, contrasted by black's more passive knight on d7. So bishop b2. Bishop is developed to the long diagonal, thereby connecting rooks and completing development. In this sense, black is still a move behind as his queen is still in the first rank. And black is now finally ready to play c5. Now, one key difference here is that black has already played b6, meaning he can recapture on c5 with the b pawn if he wants to. And so he isn't necessarily saddled with a central isolated pawn. We have c takes. On move 11, we see our first pawn capture. E takes. Rook's now centralized, expecting the d file to open, which at the moment contains a lot of juicy targets. So Magnus centralizes his rook at rook c1, and white really finishes development now that both rooks have been centralized. a6 now, grabbing a bit more space. So bishop f5 by Esipenko, and that's with a dual purpose. So both expecting Magnus to want to put his rook opposite Esipenko's queen on the open or soon to be open c file, and also wanting to get out of the way of his own rook so they can really apply pressure, expecting the central files to open. But rook c8 anyway by Magnus, also voluntarily placing his knight in a pin. And finally, Esipenko breaks the central tension. Magnus takes back with the pawn, and we get a new pawn structure, where central space is now shifted in black's favor, but both Esipenko's rooks are already eyeing Carlsen's pawns across the semi-open files. So usually these positions are a battle concerning whether black can hold on to these central pawns or not. So we have knight a4, applying more pressure to the c5 pawn. Rook c7 gets out of the pin. The c pawn is now the current focal point, attacked and defended 3 times each. We have bishop c3 by Esipenko, looking to take advantage of Carlsen's somewhat awkward positioning here on the queen side. However, this move bishop c3 is actually a bad one, although it's not easy to spot why. So can you find what Carlsen should play here in order to get a clear advantage? Now this really is the pivotal moment, so pause the video if you want and try and figure it out. Alright, so one key thing to notice here is that if the light square bishop gets access to this long diagonal, he has the option of ruining Esipenko's king safety by capturing the knight. So Carlsen should play d4 here. However, he does not. But let's take a look at what would have happened if he had. Now, I understand Carlsen's hesitance to play d4 because Esipenko can seemingly just win the exchange by pinning the rook to the queen. So here in this position, the best would be to do this anyway and allow the light squared bishop to capture on f3, like so. But here we would have knight e5, threatening to pick up the pawn with check, and so the pawn should really be defended here. So queen e2. So now for another critical move, what would you play here to further black's attack on the king side? And the move is queen a8. It's such a beautiful move, placing the queen on the edge of the board, because it's so rarely a good idea, but here it is. Because this would force Esipenko to step forward with his king to defend f3, placing his king in harm's way. And also, this allows Carlsen to now save his rook and continue on, material being equal and with better king safety. And in fact, white's position is actually worse than it may seem at first glance, as a lot of black pieces are really well situated to continue on the attack towards the king side. But Carlsen doesn't find this. So back to the actual game, Carlsen plays queen e7 here, and getting out of the fork. Esipenko plays bishop a5 anyway, a rook escapes, and bishop back. So here we actually have a threefold repetition. And even if Carlsen would have found d4 here, it doesn't work anymore because now the rook is in the way and the bishop can't capture the knight on f3.
I think it was just a
Okay,
case
so
of
that's it. That's the whole game.
pretty forced play,
In
to
the
be honest.
post-game interview, Esipenko said he
I think
felt
we
maybe it
were
was a bit
both
worse.
trying to play,
He was the
trying
one offering Magnus a draw,
to win,
and he was relieved
but
Magnus
it
accepted.
became clear that
So if you dislike this
although
video,
it looked
well,
like
they
White had
removed the
some
dislike button, didn't they? So, but you can
interesting
still tell me why it sucked in
attacking
the comments.
possibilities and good
And it is my
activity,
first video, so I'm
but he sort
hoping
of
there's
sidestepped
some
it.
room for
He
improvement.
runs serious danger
That's it.
of
Thanks
getting
for
worse
watching.
if he
Hope to see you in the next one.
if he's not